We're here today discussing sustainable solutions to pollution in the Ganges. My name is Max Zimberg.
And I'm Mary Bannister, and we're students in the Sustainable Development Department at Columbia University.
The Ganges River is considered to be a sacred mother goddess by the Hindu majority population in India, yet it's also one of the most polluted rivers in the world. This aqua pollution comes from a variety of sources, but it's mostly the result of inefficient sewage and sanitation facilities, unable to accommodate India's large and growing population, leading to unregulated open defecation, trash disposal, and even cremation. The pollution is also a combination of discharge from factories, tanneries, and agricultural runoff that is only exacerbated by the silt coming from the seasonal monsoons.
This also includes everyday pollution from people throwing plastic in the river, bathing, bringing cows to the river, and performing religious rituals known as pujas that involve throwing artifacts like flowers or even dead bodies into the river to invoke liberation from reincarnation, called moksha. Max, did you know that the Ganges River Basin is the most highly populated river basin in the world? It accounts for 25% of India's water, with 400 million people relying on the river for water to drink.
This is a major public health problem. Drinking or using the water from the Ganges results in GI disease, cholera, dysentery, hepatitis A, typhoid, and many other bacterial diseases that result from open defecation.
The Indian government has made efforts since the 1980s to counter this pollution of the river. The problems include lack of public involvement, exclusion of groups, local inefficiency and corruption, and lack of monitoring.
There's also a major disconnect about what pollution even means to policymakers, environmentalists, Hindu devotees, and Buddhists living in the region. Clearly, this issue involves complex interactions between many different stakeholders, which will require culturally driven and bottom-up approaches rather than top-down or siloed solutions. Our podcast aims to encapsulate these many perspectives. And rather than amplifying the role of religious activity as part of the problem, we aim to reveal the ways in which Hindu and Buddhist ideas can instead be used in tools that actually promote protection of the river.
We hope to provide a larger cultural context for this complex problem and provide tools to those working for solutions at the nexus of sustainable development and public health.
We are so grateful for the invaluable conversations we had with experts surrounding this issue from the Columbia community, including Dr. Rachel McDermott, Hindu goddess scholar and professor of Asian and Middle Eastern cultures at Barnard College,
Dr. Thomas Yarnall, a scholar of Buddhist philosophy and ethics at Columbia,
Anthony Acciavatti, who is trained as a historian, cartographer, architect, and author of Ganges Water Machine, Designing New India's Ancient River, who has mapped and traveled the length of the Ganges River.
And Dr. Upmanu Lall, civil engineer and director of Columbia Water Center and senior research scientist at the International Research Institute for Climate and Society.
First, we'll be hearing from the Hindu mythological perspective from Dr. Rachel McDermott, moving into environmental ethics from a Buddhist perspective with Dr. Thomas Yarnall, and Mary and I will be discussing what this possibly could mean for sustainable development and the fact that the Ganges was recently given the legal rights of a human.
While it is vital to understand religious and cultural perspectives, sewage and lacking infrastructure are still the main sources of pollution, so we could not leave out the invaluable insights of Anthony Acciavatti and Upmanu Lall, who have both worked in connection with the Indian government on this problem.
This leads into what certain NGOs and non-state actors are also doing about this issue. So we'll end with a quick word about current solutions from NGOs such as Sea Ganga or events like India Water Week. We're so happy you're here listening, and we hope you enjoy the podcast. So, Professor McDermott, as a Hindu goddess scholar, can you tell us about how the Ganges River is depicted in the Hindu tradition?
The river Ganges in art is depicted as a beautiful woman sitting on a crocodile-like vehicle called a makara. And so, and she's supposed to be a goddess of purity who washes away all sins, right? And and there are temples to her at the very beginning, at the headwaters of the Ganges. There is a temple where the Ganges comes out, and people go and worship her. So she's viewed as a very auspicious, beatific deity who brings life and purity to the world. The problem with many people who don't want to admit that the Ganges is polluted is that they say, well, how can the mother be anything but pure? You may think she's impure, but actually the mother is always pure, and she has been said in the scriptures to wash away all sins.
So how is this mythology being applied to the pollution problem?
So that's why I say it's a creative process. You mine your scriptures for things to use. When NGO workers or local people try to initiate projects to help clean her up, they often will utilize imagery of the goddess. And sometimes they say, well, she is our mother and she is pure, but she has been dirtied by her children, such that now the way to serve the Ganges is to try to clean her. And she needs her sons and her daughters to restore her. Of course, she's always pure in a sort of spiritual sense, but the Ganges has been defiled by pollutants and corruption and things like this. But, it's not going to help people who are factory owners. Mm-hmm. They're not going to buy into this. They want money. They want, just the way, in any environmental debate in any country, you have the developers on the one hand and the idealistic environmentalists on another. So it's an uphill battle. The same problem exists for the Yamuna River, which is also that splits off at Allahabad from the Ganges River. And so the Yamuna River is the place where Krishna and Radha apparently sported. And so many people say, well, do seva to Krishna and to Radha by cleaning up the river that they loved. Remember the story that it was full of poisonous snakes, the Yamuna, and Krishna dives into it and he finds one snake that has 1,000 heads and he subdues it and dances on the heads, and all the wives of the snake god come up and they pray to Krishna, don't kill our husband. And he says, okay, but go to the sea, get out of this river. So just as he tried to get rid of the pollutants or the elements in the river that were harming it and harming people around it, you could say that let us be like Krishna. Shiva is supposed to be the god who brought the Ganges to earth by agreeing to have it come on his head. Remember that? Yeah. Because the force of it would have been too great for the earth to bear, so he said, I'll break the fall. So that's why when you see images of Shiva, he often has a river on his head. So again, people can say, well, Shiva did service for the river by taking it physically onto his body. We should do something similar. So using mythology or people's beliefs to help, the Ganges will punish you if you keep polluting her. But I don't know if that has happened yet. I doubt it, because then the NGOs would be pit against the factory owners or against the policemen. I don't think that has happened. But certainly she is the mother in need. The mother's makara or her vehicle can't survive in this water. So we have to clean up so that the fish can survive, and sort of drawing upon things that everybody recognizes about her. Do seva, do service to the goddess by helping to stop factories putting pollutants into the river, or help the mother by joining cleanup crews along the bank.
It's so interesting to learn more about the mythological underpinnings of the Ganges. and how these reinterpretations could be possible solutions. So rather than thinking of Mahaganga as impollutable, she's rather seen as suffering and someone who we need to help.
You know that in the struggle for Indian independence from the British, Mother India as a whole was shown as a suffering mother who needed the help of her children.
Exactly, and it was a powerful way to rally people in saving Mother India and declaring independence. It was actually author Bankim Chandra Chatterjee who popularized depictions of Mother India in 3 ways: India of the past, of the present, and of the future. So in the past, India was seen as Durga, who's the warrior mother goddess. In the present, she was seen as emaciated Kali, who's the goddess of wrath and anger and darkness, much like the river is today. In the future, who knows? India has to be portrayed as a mother needing the protection of her sons, and we found this interpretation to be particularly important to sustainable development, as thinking about a way a country or society is shaped in the present, in the past, and most importantly, the future.
NGOs on the ground in India are really incorporating this idea using Hindu mythology. One really cool NGO we found is called Help Us Green. They do something called flower cycling, so they take flowers that are thrown ritualistically into the river and they reuse them, employing local women to turn them into incense and fertilizer, which can be sold to make a profit. On their website, they use a lot of language like that we saw referenced by Rachel McDermott, like saying how the Ganges is synonymous with the Indian civilization, but that she is dying. So they're doing this to help the Ganges in a very creative hack-a-thon type way. And their products are pretty cool. I want some of these incense sticks.
I know, right? That's a whole nother topic on global health, is how incense causes asthma. But that's another podcast. So like any good hackathon, they're solving a problem. So in India, the floriculture industry is growing at 5% annually. And to grow all of these flowers, there's a lot of farm runoff that's poisoning the Ganges and the groundwater. Harmful pesticides and insecticides are used to grow these flowers at such high rates. And the vast amount of flowers decomposes along with fecal coliform bacteria that is giving rise to severe diarrhea, cholera, and other waterborne diseases. So we urge you to go onto their website. This is not a paid promotion, though if you feel like sponsoring us, Help Us Green, we would take some green. So essentially, their hackathon product is a chemical-free pack of seedlings where the actual package decomposes and turns into a beautiful tulsi plant, which is very culturally appropriate given that tulsi is grown and used for tea all over India. And their packaging is ripe with Hindu mythology, deities like Ganesha, you may have seen the little elephant boy who's a remover of obstacles. So it's a very culturally appropriate and innovative solution to pollution in the Ganges.
So for Hindus, the Ganges is a goddess. Buddhism also came out of India. So what about Buddhism? Do Buddhists see the Ganges River as a sacred being? Or even, as the river has now been given rights, as a sentient being? Now we'll talk with Professor Thomas Yarnall on the Buddhist perspective.
The first thing I would say is that sometimes Buddhist perspectives on nature, in quotes, are surprising to Westerners. So in general, the natural environment, at least the inanimate part, like rivers and mountains and trees and so forth, is not really considered holy or sacred in most cases. Although it can be inspiring, of course, nature can be, and it's granted there are holy pilgrimage sites or sites that are considered sort of special from a Buddhist perspective that in some way contain some special energy or presence. But for the most part, nature writ large isn't really considered holy or sacred, although it is considered more in practical terms as the environment, in the sense of a container or habitat that or support for all sentient beings. The haphazard, the inconsiderate destruction of natural habitats that are critical for the survival and the flourishing of other types of sentient beings is considered unacceptable from a Buddhist moral ethical point of view. So in terms of tying this into the issue of the Ganges, then any sort of destruction of a river such as the Ganges, and so far as it is the habitat for many types of non-human sentient beings, Buddhists would shine a light on that. It's important to realize that we are part of nature. Ultimately, nature will always be more powerful than human beings, even with all their human beings, even with all their nuclear weapons, scientific equipment, and knowledge. If the sun disappears or the Earth's temperature changes by a few degrees, then we're really in trouble. But at a deeper level, we should recognize that although we are part of nature, we can control and change things to some extent due to our intelligence. Among the thousands of species of mammals on Earth, we humans have the greatest capacity to alter nature, and as such, we have a twofold responsibility. Morally, as beings of higher intelligence, we must care for this world. The other inhabitants of the planet, insects and so on, do not have the means to save or protect this world. Our other responsibility is to undo the serious environmental degradation that's the result of incorrect human behavior.
So, Professor Yarnall, what do Buddhists say about possible solutions to anthropocentric environmental degradation?
I thought it would be helpful to find some comments by some leading Buddhist scholars and teachers, and so I turned to some comments that I found by both His Holiness the Dalai Lama from Tibet and Thich Nhat Hanh, being his history with the Vietnam War and so forth. He says, "The explosion of bombs, the burning of napalm, the violent death of our neighbors and relatives, and likewise the pressure of time, noise, and pollution, and the lonely crowds, these all have been created by the disruptive course of our economic growth. They are all sources of mental illness, and they must be ended. Anything we can do to end them is preventative medicine, and political activities are not the only means to end them." And so there he's again sort of suggesting that political activities are important, but so are psychological remedies, environmental activities, socioeconomic, and so forth. And he talks elsewhere in here about the need to attack issues relating to the media, education, and so forth. So again, from a Buddhist perspective, Thich Nhat Hanh is sort of demonstrating the fact that these are all interrelated issues, and that cleaning up the environment, preserving the environment is essentially critical to mental health and to the health of sentient beings. So now some similar comments from the Dalai Lama. From the Dalai Lama's book, Imagine All the People, A Conversation with the Dalai Lama on Money, Politics, and Life as It Could Be. And the interviewer asked, "Do you think democracy is helping laws to evolve in this way?" And he answers, "Yes, in democratic countries, legal systems should work that way and generally do, but these laws, nevertheless, partially contradict the Buddhist principle of interdependence, since these laws do not include quote-unquote democratic rights for the environment and the animal realm. Most legal systems refer only to human rights and do not consider the rights of animals or other beings that share the planet with us."
This point on the Buddhist view of sentient beings is very interesting right now, given the fact that courts have very recently given the Yamuna and Ganges rivers the rights of human beings. It seems that a Buddhist would not agree with this, but they would see all animals that live within the rivers as having the same rights as humans do, as sentient beings. From a Buddhist perspective, what role do political solutions play in this solving problems like this?
So now some similar comments from the Dalai Lama. Speaking on the issue of politics, he said, "If I were actually to vote in an election, it would be for one of the environmental parties. One of the most positive developments in the world recently has been the growing awareness of the importance of nature." Now he says, "There's nothing sacred or holy about this. Taking care of our planet is like taking care of our houses. Since we human beings come from nature, there's no point in our going against nature, which is why I say the environment is not a matter of a religion or ethics or morality. These are luxuries, since we can survive without them. But we will not survive if we continue to go against nature." He then goes on to say, "We have to accept this. If we unbalance nature, humankind will suffer." Of course, elsewhere he's mentioned all sentient beings will suffer. Furthermore, as people alive today, we must consider future generations. A clean environment is a human right like any other. It's therefore part of our responsibility towards others to ensure that the world we pass on is as healthy, not healthier, than we found it.
That quote from the Dalai Lama sounds a lot like the 1987 Brundtland Report definition of sustainable development, which is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I think it's so important that we mobilize children and people of all faith to think about the consequences of their polluting habits, not just in the short term, but what this will mean for future generations and other forms of biodiversity in life. So I can't stop thinking about what Dr. Lall said about the dolphins.
So the other thing to tell you is that, up to maybe 30, 40 years ago, there were river dolphins. The river was teeming with life, even though there was pollution. And at this point, I don't think there's much of any life in there.
No oxygen will do that.
Yeah.
I know, first the Ganges crocodile is dying, now all the river dolphins?
Gangetic dolphins are actually a species of dolphin native and extant to the Ganges River.
So there are all these negative externalities on the ecosystem of the Ganges and all the animals as well as humans that rely on it.
So it's really going to take ecosystem-based management policies that take into account the entire ecosystem and symbiotic reliance of humans, animals, plants, and other natural resources. Plus, everybody loves dolphins, so this could be a really effective way to really rally up people's concern for pollution in the Ganges. Lastly, it is important not to make this a purely religious or faith-based issue. We bring in Buddhism here not as another religion, but as a philosophy, because we could well go into Islamic perspectives, which are incredibly important in this issue, specifically because of the tanneries that line the Ganges River. These tanneries, or places where animal hides are tanned, typically water buffalo in this case, are mostly owned by Muslims, so they receive a disproportionate amount of blame for the pollutants and runoff going into the Ganges River. So Dr. Lall, can you explain the pollution problem from an engineering point of view and how the Ganges might be hydrologically unique?
You have a series of canals that divert water from the river. This is one factor. This is for irrigated agriculture in the states that the Ganges flows through. Okay? Mm-hmm. And there are barrages across the river that allow you to block the flow of the river and divert this water. The second thing that goes on is that there is no shortage of tanneries, other wastewater creating things that put a nice cocktail of anything you can imagine into the river. Right. Okay. So it's the combination of the depletion of the flow in the river, which is primarily for agriculture, a few thermal power plants that need cooling water, and what comes back from them is not polluted but just warmer water. But the warmer water will now allow bacteria, microorganisms, algae to grow at a higher rate, and they will consume oxygen more rapidly from the water as a result. So it is a compounding factor. The government of India's plans were to build a ridiculous number of wastewater treatment plants, but their plan included no monitoring, and their plan did not include enforcement of pollution controls on individual point sources. So that's kind of where things were 2 years ago, and I know they've had various universities in India and various government organizations fooling around with this, but I don't think anything significant has happened. I don't know the people at Columbia who are working on this. There's Anthony, who's written the book on the Ganges, and he walked the Ganges and all that. Yeah. So he may be able to give you a better narrative on what he has seen firsthand. But this is the situation. The government doesn't release the data on either flow in the river or on the levels of pollution in the river. Some of the Indian Institutes of Technologies have the grant from the government for the last 15 years to collect this data, analyze this data, and make sense of it. I have not seen a public release of that data. Okay. There is a flood every year still, so if there is a flood, you now have sediment mobilized, so that's a new source of pollution.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But since the river is typically muddy, people have always accepted that there's sediment in there. The difference is now the sediment is carrying nutrients and it's carrying metals, which it didn't historically do, and the metals include arsenic.
Right. Mm-hmm. So does just the natural sediment, it makes the water more opaque to begin with? Okay. So that's
and the sediment, the Himalayas are a young mountain range, so anytime there's a precipitation episode, snow melt or rain, there is a lot of sediment mobilized.
Right.
That's natural. And so what's coming down from the mountains as sediment is still natural sediment. There might be some arsenic, there might be viruses and bacteria in it, but what starts happening once you get out of the mountains is large populations living on the shores of the river that are discharging anything you can imagine.
Right.
Do you think water infrastructure projects and laws are sufficient to solve this problem?
What I told the government of India when they asked me to review this stuff was, if you have no monitoring of the sediments and you don't really know what is going on, you can treat the water. You'll put treated water in the river. Let's say you take the entire flow of the river magically and run it through a mammoth treatment plant and put it back in after treatment. If the sediments are now super contaminated from decades of crap showing up in there, the clean water will just leach all that pollution off the sediments back into the water column. And the exchange time associated with that in the day is not like it's going to take up forever. So they have to have consistent space and time monitoring of water and sediments through the river. And that will also allow them to figure out whether or not what they're putting down as treatment is being effective. It could well be that they have to dredge a very large quantity of those sediments to reach any kind of effectiveness.
Right. Okay. So what you were kind of saying about, designing our future, the things you're doing with America's water and things like that, do you think that there's, a way for us to engineer ourselves out of this?
I think that the idea that you put large wastewater treatment plants in a few places and hope for the best is over. And especially in that kind of a situation, at every point of use where wastewater is generated or, some neighborhood scale or whatever, they need to be able, the technology exists, they should be putting that in so that you get clean up right there.
Interesting. And is there anything you can say just with your personal experience with the Indian government now and any sort of...
No, I won't comment on the Indian government other than saying that it's not fun to work with them.
Okay.
So, Anthony, we heard from Dr. Lall about current governmental and infrastructural developments around the Ganges. Given your extensive experience traveling and mapping the Ganges, why do you think these haven't been affected in cleaning it up?
I don't mean to sound like I think it's hopeless without that at all. It's just that I think the usual tack of the World Bank and the government of India, especially the national level, but I think you have to take a different angle. And one of those that I found was helpful is to think about how you piggyback measures to deal with pollution on other forms of infrastructure. So groundwater is a huge issue in these places. So how do you develop groundwater systems that are shared? Because they're all monsoon. The Ganges is a monsoon river. So how do you pair groundwater access with introducing other forms of dealing with defecation? So how do you also then develop soft infrastructures for these areas? And again, because World Bank's limited the amount of $1 billion, it's really nothing. When I meet with people in the government, they always like, we think that maybe those soft infrastructures of wetlands, biospheres are a good idea, but politicians don't want to do that because they want to build a monument. So a sewage treatment plant is a monument, but a wetland doesn't look like anything. Isn't. So there's that kind of social dimension to it as well.
So my first thought, hearing about all of this pollution, was that the Ganges must be completely underfunded. There must not be any sort of hydrological infrastructure at all. But even Anthony said that the Ganga Basin is one of the world's most hyper-engineered places and rivers in the world. So what's going on here?
And Dr. Lall talked about a lot of this problem coming from insufficient monitoring and data collection by the government, and the problem that the government changes so frequently, and that this data can also often be unreliable and not last past an election cycle. In discussing this issue of lack of government data, one civil society organization that Anthony pointed us towards is the Center for Ganga River Basin Management and Studies, C-Ganga. It was established at the Indian Institute of Technology in Kanpur as a center of excellence for coalition, creation, and dissemination of knowledge and information for sustainable development of the Ganga River Basin.
The center acts in the capacity of a comprehensive think tank to the National Mission for Clean Ganga, NMCG, Ministry of Water Resources, River Development and Ganga Rejuvenation, Government of India, and in its stated goals and objectives vis-a-vis the Ganga River Basin. It incorporates some of the aspects that Dr. Yarnall talked about as the Ganga as an ecological entity, Nirmal Dhara, and goes really deeply into the scientific research on developing protocols for aquifer mapping, coordination with the Institute, which is also where Dr. Lall went to school, for civil engineering. And they also host two really important other organizations. One is known as Gangapedia, which acts as a really transparent hub for the mission and management plans in everything having to do with C-Ganga's research as a think tank. So this includes missions like ecological restoration, sustainable agriculture, geological safeguarding, basin protection from natural disasters, river hazard management, environmental knowledge and cultural sensitivity, and plans for sewage treatment, urban planning, and flood plan mapping.
Experts, including these at C-Ganga, have also come together for 5 different India Water Weeks hosted in April or January. These are events that have attracted up to 24 different countries and 1,500 different delegates, with themes including efficient water management, water for all, and in 2017, water and energy for inclusive growth.
They also had a theme on water, energy, and food security, calls for solutions, which Dr. Lall's work is especially focused in, this nexus between water, climate, energy, and food. So as an architect and cartographer, something really interesting that Anthony Acciavatti did in his travels to India and walking and backpacking and sailing around the Ganges is placing this emphasis on drawing and mapping out the Ganges. Because we said 400 million people rely on it, how is one in Varanasi supposed to know what the Ganges looks to someone else in Rishikesh? In a way, Anthony's own hack-a-thon project is his book, Ganges Water Machine, Designing New India's Ancient River. By the way, we are also not sponsored by this book, but please go out and take a look at it and buy it. It is so beautiful and so well put together and researched. And in it, he really calls for this remapping of the Ganges. Because when he first started his research, there were no maps at all provided by the government. There's something really important in sustainable development and global health, fields where the problems that we're dealing with can be microscopic or underwater, and it's really important that we map them out and bring them visually to the forefront of people's minds, whether that means through an atlas, through Hindu mythology,
or with a podcast.
Yeah, that would be really effective.
Thank you so much for joining us as we've talked about approaching this issue of pollution in the Ganges River from all these different perspectives, from that of mythology and culture in India, from the Hindu and Buddhist perspective, to that of current problems in sustainable development and infrastructure management.
Before listening, if you didn't know how serious the problem of pollution in the Ganges is, we hope you walked away with a heightened understanding of how we need to act now, for this generation and all the generations to come. And if you did know about it in general, we hope you gain a deeper historical perspective that will lead to continued research, projects,
and hackathons of your own.
Thank you so much. I'm Max Zimberg.
And I'm Mary Bannister. Thank you so much.
Namaste.